I think that's one of the main value adds people get from what Sophie has built and what they're doing over there. And I think it really shows, I think, respect for thought leadership in the space. And I think it's even though, CleanTech 1.0 has happened and sort of there's now a resurgence of VC funds in the space, it's still a space that's welcoming new thought leaders and has, I think, a lot of space for people to get their thoughts out there and help sort of the next generation of startups.
Welcome back to the CleanTechies podcast, where we interview ClimateTech founders and VCs to discuss all things building and investing to solve the biggest challenge of our generation, climate change. Today we have a slightly different episode since we are speaking with Somil Aggarwal. Somil is someone I met recently who is a VC and also writes a newsletter called SIP or SIP on social impact and product. We decided last minute at the end of last week to record an episode because of the news with Planeteer. For those unfamiliar, Planeteer is a newly announced ClimateTech venture fund led by Sophie Pradam, one of the co-founders of the CTVC newsletter, which has become synonymous with the ClimateTech space. It's less of an interview and more of a discussion, so let us know what you think, as we are hoping to do more of these in the future. We're live. How's it going, Somil?
Doing well. How are you?
Yeah, man. I am. It's been a very stressful week. Not gonna lie. It's been a hell of a week. But hey, listen, I'm glad to be jumping on to record with you, man. This is exciting.
No better way I'd rather spend a Friday night, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's probably not a lot of people in New York would like to spend their Friday night on a podcast instead of out, partying or something. Everybody I meet, they're always like, "Oh man, people love New York because they love to party." I'm like, well, I'm really not a party person, and I love it here.
Yes.
I think it depends on who you are, right? But anyways, man, so obviously we've got a new guest today, everybody. Want to introduce Somil. So I guess want to just give us a quick background on yourself. I'm really keen to have you part of this. I guess from my side initially, for everybody listening, we connected a couple weeks ago, I think. What is it? 6 weeks ago initially.
Yeah.
And just had a quick chat. And I was like, man, this guy really likes ClimateTech. He seems like he knows what he's talking about. He's also a content creator. So I said, why don't we collaborate a little bit? So tell us a bit about yourself for everybody.
Yeah, thanks so much for the introduction, man. Super excited. I've been a fan of the CleanTechies podcast for some time, so it's a bit surreal. But like you said, I'm a content creator myself, so this is a lot of fun for me. I run a newsletter called SIP, which is basically stands for social impact and product. And I can sort of tie that into my background a little bit. So I have a background in venture capital. I was a founder myself in ag tech, and I have a product management experience, especially related to social impact. A lot of my work to date has been focused on ag tech, and the company that I founded was based on building a data tracking tool for small farmers. I've spoken at the FAO for the work that I did in Kenya, observing agriculture and agricultural innovation. And I think the biggest thing about ag tech for me was that it was so closely intertwined with the environment. So resource conservation, the climate, pollution, I just couldn't escape. So, and I don't mean to make it sound like that. Like I was very happy to have been so tied into the earth and just everything that was going on. Once I sort of moved on from that chapter, I realized how much I wanted to stay engaged with it. So I started SIP as a way to sort of leverage my, I work in venture capital now, leverage that experience as a founder, as a venture capitalist, and related to issues in climate, sustainability, and social impact. For me, I'm super passionate about how they all interact. I think the biggest thing that I see in climate between the intersection of these three fields is the de-risking of the solutions. So whether it's funding these solutions from the point of a venture capitalist, building the solutions, from the point of a founder, or building the underlying technology from the point of like a researcher or a policy maker and things like that. Everyone's trying to build ways and put information together that'll help de-risk climate solutions and help them scale. And so I'm super happy to be talking about that with you today. And I just want to mention that I was also born on Earth Day. So it's basically an unspoken rule that this had to happen, I think. So
yeah, it was written into all of the stars, mate. Hey there. Quick break to remind any founders or VCs listening, if you are looking for deal flow, seeking to raise funding, looking for partners to help service your needs, or perhaps you're looking for corporate investment partners, feel free to reach out to us through our Slack channel, which can be found in the description. Because we meet a lot of people in this space, we set aside time each week to make introductions to the various people that we encounter. This is something we do free of charge in order to help these incredible companies solving climate change to scale. Looking forward to hearing from you in the Slack channel. I'm kind of curious. I don't remember if we've talked about this before or not, but did you start SIP after you started a VC or before?
Uh, Essentially same time. I think it coincided with the next chapter in my life after I'd finished some of those other projects that I talked about. So I would say same time.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Yeah. I'm always, obviously, like we probably could talk about this a little bit today, specifically on the topic we're going to mention. But I think content is really, really important, not just from the perspective that you get to bring people in, but it's also helpful to basically clear your thoughts. I'm the kind of person who I I did this one podcast before this to kind of like really demonstrate that I can make a professional podcast, because my podcasts before that were me just like chatting with friends and getting to know them. Like I just wanted to break the barrier of doing it. And then I realized that in order to do a more professional podcast, it required a little bit more like thought, right? And going through what is in your mind and getting it out. I am not somebody who is good at putting it on paper. I'm usually good at figuring out what I think through talking to people. So that's why I love it. But let's introduce our topic today. So the reason why we jumped on kind of last minute here is something that to me seems like a very big topic and a kind of like a big piece of news in the ClimateTech VC space personally. And that is because Planeteer was launched today. So for those people who are at all involved in the space, you probably know ClimateTech VC, the newsletter. So just kind of give a bit of background. I This is how it relates to me personally. So I joined my company Next Wave working in renewables recruitment, and I started that in March 2020. And I knew nothing about renewables. I knew nothing about clean tech. All I remember at the beginning was talking about how I was interested in building some kind of like accelerator in the future. And my boss was like, "Oh, you probably would like the clean tech stuff, right? That's more like a startup, right? It's not the energy side of things." And yes, they did call it clean tech at the time. It wasn't called climate tech.
Yeah.
And so I think it was probably, a couple months later, obviously the pandemic hit. So there was a lot of like confusion of what's going on in life in general. But then I think once I found my footing, I was like, okay, now long term, my goal is to get into clean tech. So what are the resources out there? And I'm pretty sure I found the newsletter ClimateTech VC probably in June or July of that year, 2020. And I believe it was started in April 2020, right? So it started by Kim Zhou and Sophie Perdom. And I don't know the exact details of their background, but I'm just fascinated by this. They started this newsletter. It's grown to over 50,000 subscribers. And I would say it's become one of the leading kind of authorities, in my opinion, on where you go to find out what's happening with funding. Obviously, there are sources that you can find those things from. But for me, it's been extremely valuable in my understanding of the landscape. And it's something that I've been able to refer to other founders countless times. They're like, hey, I'm looking to get into VC, or I'm looking to get in, I'm looking to raise, or I'm looking to get into climate. And I can tell them, go look at this list. There's all these companies. If you go through there, you'll find the portfolio companies that they invest in, and you'll find jobs, right? So there's just so many things that this newsletter really kind of turned into. And now Sophie has launched her own fund, which I think is just crazy. About basically a 3 year essentially a 3 year timeline from becoming kind of somebody who talks about the space to being able to launch her own VC. So that's why we're here to talk today, just kind of react to it. So I'm going to just toss it up over to you. What are your kind of initial thoughts when you saw this?
Yeah. Fantastic backdrop. I think this is just a testament to what passion about a space can do, right? I think when you go through the CTVC resources and platform and everything, it's clear that, there are a lot of newsletters and things out there that give you sort of disparate information. So they might track exits, they might track deal flow, but they don't necessarily give you the full picture, right? So as much as you can use them in one platform, it's not a single source of truth, right? And I don't know if they've really used this as branding, but I think they can. I think that's one of the main value adds people get from what Sophie has built and what they're doing over there. And I think it really shows, I think, respect for thought leadership in the space. And I think it's even though, CleanTech 1.0 has happened, and sort of there's now a resurgence of VC funds in the space. It's still a space that's welcoming new thought leaders and has, I think, a lot of space for people to get their thoughts out there and help sort of the next generation of startups. I think CTVC sort of solidified themselves as that thought leader, and their ability to raise capital on top of that. They brought in a pretty prestigious person, which I think we'll talk about, but their ability to use that and parlay that into raising capital, it's not easy. The thing that I really want to bring up about that is they raise capital in this environment, right? And I want to bring up one point about that. So there's a report that was published about 2022 that said by Carbon Equity that said that venture capital funding had decreased by 35%, but ClimateTech had actually increased by about 3%. So I think we should set the backdrop here by saying that's not like ClimateTech really decreased, but if it wasn't for what happened in the market downturn, it might have been a lot more. But I think it shows that people trust thought leadership and people trust people who have been working in this space for some time. And maybe to be a little bit inspirational, it just shows that it's really, I think, the right space and the right time to be here, because while everyone else is sort of like scrambling, there's potentially one of the most visible people in the space just raised a new fund and showed the ability to raise capital around issues in climate.
Hey there. Are you building a climate tech business and looking for very specialized talent? Consider reaching out to our sponsors, NextWave Partners. NextWave are experts in talent acquisition, recruitment, and retention across the climate tech, renewables, and ESG spaces globally. So if your team is growing or you're looking to make a career change yourself, feel free to reach out to NextWave at next-wavepartners.com or reach out to one of their consultants directly via their LinkedIn page. Yeah, there's a couple things there. I mean, the last point about her being a visuals person in space, like, it is very true. I think I don't know if we're exaggerating her reach, but to me, I've never bumped into anybody who is in a VC role, who's in climate, who doesn't know about this, right? I've bumped into founders who don't know about this yet, but it's usually because they just started, right? Or they're coming from some kind of other traditional background, and then they're getting into climate, and then they're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I usually send them that, and if they haven't seen it, they message me back like an hour later, like, oh my gosh, this is the best thing since sliced bread. Like, they love it, right? So there's that aspect I think is interesting. And you brought up the point about the raising in this environment, right? It's June. It's June now, right? Yeah, it's June now, and that means that she definitely had to have raised this during like this difficult time, right? And we don't know necessarily if they closed the whole fund because there's not total details there, or if they just made a small close in order to announce it, right? Which could have been a nice strategy, possibly. I don't know. I don't know what her thoughts are there. But I just think it's really fascinating. Like, you go from being a content creator essentially, and it's not like she didn't have some kind of background in it, but from being a content creator to basically building something that can be really, really good. And it's brilliant because now, being like one of the most trusted sources, or at least something that everybody reads every single week, right? Now her deal flow is going to be so easy to get the deals, right? Yes, she'll have to sort through them, but at least she'll have the deals coming. And I think that can be difficult for a lot of the VCs in some cases.
Yeah, I think you brought something up that is, really important, I think, at the early stage, which is the fund, the fund that she's built and the state that she's targeting is pre-seed and seed, right? And I think that's definitely, pre-product market fit, pre-growth in a way. So I think there's real value that she's going to be able to provide from the network and the community that she's been able to build, right? And this just, this is sort of the big news in this space that I think are special inspirations to us. But I think this is just to go to the climate, investing space as a whole, which is that, and this translates to regular investing, but I think you maybe be seeing a premium on this, right? With them being able to do this, which is of the power of networks that you're able to create. A lot of these industries, I wouldn't call them nascent, but they're not, tried and true 30, 40, 50-year-old industries at this point, right? And with the advent of AI and other technologies, I don't necessarily think they're going to touch climate as much as they might touch, like productivity tools, but you're still going to see a lot of people scrambling to find mentors and people to sit on board seats and people to step in as advisors who have gone through the cycles of building in climate, producing in climate, and doing this research, right? I think that's going to be really, really important. And I wouldn't be surprised if that went into why she was able to raise capital in the first place.
And I think it also speaks broadly to, I mean, this is probably, I would consider this at maybe one of the highest levels, quote unquote, of basically building reputation and going into the space, right? Building reputation for knowing something and then leveraging that reputation to raise a fund, right? That's probably one of the most difficult things, because you can build a reputation in other spaces as well and then raise money for your company. But what I want to point out is, like, in the past 2.5 years of doing this podcast, I have bumped into a lot of people who 2.5 years ago knew nothing about the space, right? But they just read everything. They decided, hey, I'm gonna learn about this, or maybe they already knew about it and they just started to get into the startup world. But they became experts by reading, by being involved, by participating in all the communities and commenting, and usually in some form or another making content. And then they can become kind of the thought leaders of the space. And I've seen that happen for some people in less than 12 months, right? So I think that it's really, to me, as an opportunistic person, there's a lot of people out there who are constantly asking me, like, how do I get a job in climate? And I just think that if you're somebody who thinks, especially for people who have already like lived half their career, who have some type of expertise, spend time noodling on the things that you think you can bring to the table. Because especially if you were in a non-climate, like non-eco kind of job or career, you probably have a lot of insight that you can bring to the table to build some company to solve a solution or solve a problem in that space. So I would just kind of encourage people that it's it's kind of like the Wild West in terms of opportunities out there. It just seems difficult sometimes because there's a lot of science words that get thrown around. Hey there, thanks for listening to this episode. If you made it this far, it's likely that you're enjoying the show, so I wanted to ask your help. If you're enjoying it, please give us a review on Apple Podcasts and share with somebody in the same industry who might find this interesting. And if you're interested in getting summaries of these episodes, go subscribe to our newsletter that comes out on LinkedIn and Substack. Links can be found in the description. Thanks for your help in growing the reach of this show.
Yeah, I'll add to that, and then I want to throw a question at you. I feel like you haven't given enough opinions yet. So when I've talked to the founders, the operators, the experts that I have had on SIP, one of the things they talk about, especially is the evolution of climate, is that climate's not an industry. It is basically every industry. Every industry is going to have to interact and adapt to issues in climate at some point or another. And I think that's touching what you're saying, which is that at some point, when every industry, whether it's insurance and having to integrate different climate factors, we just saw in California, right? Insurers are now refusing new claims due to concerns about climate, right? You go into construction, industry, fintech with different types of carbon market financing and things like that. There's going to be a huge premium on just leveraging your existing knowledge and a demand to adapt that to new issues in climate. I mean, you can see the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act. There's now a huge momentum behind government funding and government support to catalyze and change these industries. And I think that, just seconds the point that you made. One thing I kind of want to throw to you in the release is that they talked about VC being sort of a crowded space. And now this being in the advent of her launch, needing to differentiate yourself as a venture capitalist to a founder beyond the term sheet, right? And I think this is something that, VCs in San Francisco definitely understand very, very well, which is you can't just offer the term sheet and capital. There has to be something special about you, right? I'm wondering, in your experience talking to founders and talking to other venture capitalists, right, throughout your journey, what do you think people have to offer, and sort of what are people like? What do people want most from an investing or founding perspective in this day and age?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I've talked to a lot of people who will send me their decks, and I like try to give them critiques when I have time. And there's a lot of people who are just very frustrated because there's kind of two camps, I would say. There's people who want to make an impact and they just see it through their own lens. So they're like, oh, my technology, my idea is so great. I just need money to go build it. And it's like, okay, we get that, but you got to
Yeah.
go build something that shows traction, right? And I think that it's difficult because for some, climate is they're not familiar with the traditional venture space, right? There's a lot of people entering now who have no clue how like traditional startup land works, right? They're not familiar with the ecosystem, and so they don't really get the process of kind of iterating and getting traction and doing an MVP, etc. It can be very difficult for them in some cases. So on one hand, you've got people who are they really in essence they're in need of feedback and somebody to break through to them and say, hey, listen, just so you know, like there's nothing against you. You just need to build kind of baby steps to get that traction to demonstrate it, especially if it's science, right? If it's science, you need to have certain demonstrations around your technology. So that's on one hand. Then on the other hand, you have people who have pretty good technology. They understand the landscape, and what they're looking for from investors is usually an investor that can help them with the next step. So I would say there's plenty. I say that very hesitantly. There's plenty of VCs out there, especially in the early stage. For now, their funds will dry up at some point, but at the moment, I think there's enough dry powder to make it work from the majority of the ClimateTech startups out there that actually have legs. And what they're looking for are people who have kind of their goggles on for the next round. And I think that they could use that assistance from the commercial perspective. I had somebody on, this will probably come out before that episode comes on, but I had a returning guest in the VC space talk about how they always make sure, and I thought this was fascinating, they always make sure that the companies that they choose to invest in can be turned into a regular venture backable business. Meaning, even if there are no ClimateTech VCs at the Series A and B and C rounds, they will still be able to get investment. And I think that's something that it's very difficult because you've got a lot of convolution happening with hardware and software kind of being in the same pools in many cases. When you can obviously invest venture dollars in hardware, it's difficult. There's a lot of difficulties and differentiations there. But when you mix these, sometimes you're going to have difficulties on the exit path, right? As you get further along, you've proven your pilot, you're getting things going. You're going to need investors who are at a high level in terms of what round they invest in and how much money they invest. And part of me wants to believe, yeah, for sure, there will be companies that come to fill that gap. However, there may not be for the early companies, right? It might take a while to raise those larger funds. So I don't know. I hope that answers the question. I think that those are the two things that really come to mind.
Yeah, I'll sort of I'd love to dive into that second part, which is, essentially the returns on your investment in climate, right? I think that's a lot of the reason why we saw CleanTech 1.0, turn into 1.0 and not what it is today, right? Which is, I think the stat was about 10% only 10% of returns, only 10% of investments returned, right? And I think there's, an interesting data point that I want to put in front of you and sort of get your feedback on as well. Actually, funny enough, CTVC put out a graphic that had, in terms of exits, 63% were at the corporate level, right? And if you look even deeper, only 6% of climate tech companies IPO'd, right? I think that received venture funding. And, as a quick background, for investing, IPOing is sort of the gold standard in venture, right? And so your ability to see a company IPO, for example, in some of the work that I do, if a company is IPO'd in a space, just today, actually, I was talking to a company who came to us basically because of the example that an IPO had set, right? And so once you see, because that information also goes public, right? Once a company goes through IPO and things like that, so it becomes a huge inspiration for the rest of the space, right? I think with this much acquisition activity, which is this much M&A and corporations sort of being the buyers, I think it poses an interesting question that it's fantastic to see another stage at the pre-seed and seed level. But you meant kind of parlaying the question that you brought up, which is, what does the later stage look like? I was speaking with, I'll give a quick shout out to Pooja. I spoke to her earlier today, Pooja Balachandar. She's the head of the venture launchpad at Carbon 13, a venture launchpad based in Cambridge in the United Kingdom. And she was talking about in her experience, that a lot of people are thinking about the merger and acquisition, the corporate acquisition route for their startups. And while that's fantastic, I think that puts into question, in this wave of climate tech companies, we're probably going to see better returns, right, overall compared to what CleanTech 1.0 was. But is it going to be enough to keep this industry going, right? Because you may not see as many IPOs and you may not see a lot of the funds return on that money. And so I would say a lot of funds have started since 2020, right? If you've invested your capital, you're deploying it over, let's say, 5 years, and then you expect your returns within 7 to 10 years. that puts us at, about the late 2020s. So you're going to start seeing a big question of like, okay, what happened to those investments in climate, right? Is this an industry that we can invest in? I will say that a lot of the legislation towards, the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, a lot of these things put in place the potential for buyers in this space. And I think that's an incredible move forward. But I think it's a question that we have to ask ourselves, which is, where are the returns going to come from? And how can we prepare founders to try and gear themselves to basically make climate a profitable venture business?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my opinion is that I just think there needs to be a certain maturity reached with the way founders grow their businesses and seeking to get to profitability quicker. And I think there's been a couple examples of IPOs in climate that went really poorly. I won't mention the ones I'm thinking of. I don't want to throw them under the bus, but they basically sought to do it as a funding mechanism rather than like, as a good outcome, because they weren't ready for it, right? They weren't profitable at all, and then as a result, investors were like, listen, like we don't have confidence in your stock anymore. We're dropping it, right? And so I think it's difficult from that perspective that you have to get to a point where you at least have the fundamentals ready to go to the IPO process. I also do believe that in a lot of cases, a lot of the buyers of this technology that are actually purchasing the companies, there could be a path where, depending on how they look at it, and I'd be really keen to get your thoughts on this too, but is depending on how they look at it, rather than acquiring it, maybe just taking a stake in a round and bringing some of their friends along, because some of these are very big industries, right? That are not exactly, uh, there's not a lot of players, right? Some of these are kind of like, for example, the oil and gas space buys a lot of technology to try to decarbonize, and there's not necessarily that many players in it. So examples like that, where it's a relatively small number of large corporations playing in it, maybe one should, to try to get their own personal their own advantage, take a stake in the company and then just invest in it, because if they truly want the outcomes to be good, they should be thinking about how can this go well for them as well. Or they should just have their own R&D labs if they really want that, right? If they really want that, just invest in their own R&D. I don't know, maybe there should be a premium or something, but I do see it as a bit of an issue that could happen. However, because we have enough time horizon, and I think that there's enough, I guess, trepidation around the idea of like, how long should we wait? How long should it be expected to get a return from a hardware company? I think that because of the kind of convoluted waters there, people will be a little bit more patient. And I also do believe that you have to, it kind of comes back to the LPs, right? Will the LPs continue to have confidence in climate? And I would assume the answer is always going to be yes going forward, because I think that as climate events continue to happen and as they really see like, wow, this is really taking hold across the world. I know that from a talent perspective, everyone wants to work in climate, and I don't think that anybody can deny that. Like you find people just like clamoring to get into climate. So I just think that at the end of the day, it's going to be driven by the popular opinion, which is kind of going to drive LPs to a large extent, and that there should be continued funds. But I don't know the path to helping get them, making sure this is all successful. I don't know your thoughts there.
Well, look, I think we're probably sitting at a stage where we're seeing the least amount of government involvement in climate that we're going to see moving forward, which is exciting, right? So I think in terms of the question about buyers and capital moving forward, I think a lot will change, right? And to your point about oil and gas, maybe there'll be increased support for other players to get more competitive in the space with subsidies that are going in towards energy and decarbonization. A lot of those haven't really been deployed, and it's not super clear how they will be deployed, right? And so I think that's definitely gonna be something worth watching. One thing that I also want to bring back as a topic is the importance of strategics, right? Strategic investors, right? In the early stages of a company, right? And I think what the real takeaway from that is with the advent of something like CTVC as a fund now as Planeteer, right? Pressure in terms of founders and VCs who are sort of all on the same team to build an ecosystem and change the ecosystem to encourage strategic investments earlier on in companies' life cycles, right? And I'll admit that I don't know the data points on this, so in case that's a burgeoning trend, then fantastic, we're already on the path there, right? But I think you see in a lot of other industries, strategic investors will basically at the very early stage, at the angel stage, first institutional round. Around then, they'll get involved and they're put in, money to fund a company that will build a solution that they can acquire down the road, right? And so I don't necessarily know myself whether that's not happening, but I think what you were talking about, I think definitely one of the things, especially from a thought leadership point of view, and I do want to get your thoughts on that, having strategics enter companies earlier on sort of gives you access to that knowledge base, right? The knowledge of a corporation or whoever your advisor is on your team from that investment to be able to help you figure out, what's the most profitable way to get this to scale that's in favor of your company and also relationship that could lead to an acquisition or lead to a partnership or whatever have it. But I do want to bring up a point here, which is making yourself visible, right, and making yourself known. So you yourself, as someone who's been in this space, and if we're talking about someone who's transitioned from thought leadership to a venture side, let's start with the thought leadership, right, which is something you're super knowledgeable about. How do you think that founders can look at this? Of course, founders not going to go from a founder doing nothing to a venture capital, right? But I think it shows the premium on building your own brand and building your own knowledge base. What's your advice, given like how exciting of a time it is to be knowledgeable in this space, to founders who want to become known for the cool work that they're doing and all the knowledge that they have?
I mean, I think that there's a lot of people who I look up to in the space. One in particular that really kind of, I think, started a lot of things was Tom Rand from ArcTurn. I think he's a really good example of somebody who just demonstrated and was very early on in climate VC to say, like, listen, this is not just about like solving it's not just about solving a climate crisis. There also it has to make money, otherwise you're never going to make it happen. So I think that he's an example of somebody who started early on in the space, but there's a lot of ways you can do it. And I do think it's important to do it. How you do it, if you're trying to build a company, I don't know the exact answer to that question. I always tell people start a podcast because you can attract the same similar minded type of people, but I don't necessarily know if that's the best case scenario for a lot of people. And some people can be intimidated by it sometimes, whereas, like, for example, I'm intimidated more by writing than I am podcasting. So I would say probably writing about a specific topic and getting really deep into it. If you want to build a reputation for something, we talked about it earlier, there are many, many potential deep verticals in climate. And most of the content out there, there's a lot of climate podcasts now. They're largely, from what I've seen, and I have to admit, I don't listen religiously to all of them, but from what I've seen, they're largely like theoretical and touching the surface. They don't necessarily have like one super deep topic area. There's a couple like that. But I think that if you can just pick your topic area and just start writing about it, especially through Substack or becoming an influencer on LinkedIn about these things, like just putting yourself out there and becoming an expert in the space by reading, by talking to people, and by producing content, it's very hard to argue against it. Let's put it this way. When I first started learning about ESG, I wanted to make sure I had a basic understanding. So what I did was I happened to be in this program, which is now called Taptive. It's kind of like, it was called My MBA at one point. It's called Taptive now, but a friend of mine started this thing. And he was like basically encouraging people to write, right? So you read something and you're forced to put out a piece. And as a result, you kind of formalize it, which is that level of knowledge, right? Can you teach it? If you can teach it to some extent, then you've quote unquote mastered it. I'm not going to say I've mastered ESG. So just a disclaimer there. But point is, I learned a lot about it. I put out some pieces and I like made them public on my LinkedIn. And I would have people reaching out, assuming that I was like a deep expert in it, because there wasn't that many people doing that, right? There was other people doing that who were far, far more capable and knowledgeable than me, but it still got me in the room and have conversations that I wouldn't have had previously. So I don't know if that answers the question. I don't have like a specific guideline on how to do it. I do think it's important, but I think it's important to be specific, because if you're specific, yes, it might seem like, pulling teeth at the beginning to get listeners or readers. But if you are specific enough, you will find the right people when they're looking for it, when the time comes, when some venture capitalist has like an idea, like, oh man, we need to find a company in this space to invest in. You need to be findable, and it needs to look like, holy crap, this person is like an inch wide and a mile deep on this topic. We should definitely talk to them.
Yeah, just sort of seconding your point, one of the people that I really look up to in this space, he's been an angel investor for 10 years, and he goes as far as to be active in the research space and the research reports. So you can imagine, like, that's a real investment in terms of being visible, right? But I think it's the same way where he's very keen on making sure that he's attached to the writing that he does, and he's seen the ROI in terms of it's been 10 years now, right? It's not a quick process, although 3 years for CTVC maybe is some inspiration for it to be quicker, right? I think there's definitely examples of people who have cultivated thought leadership over time just for the sake of visibility, right? So even if I think you're having questions, and I'd love to take Sif and the CleanTechies podcast just for an example. It really gives a platform for you to be able to put your opinion in front of other people. And when it comes to funding, funding is also a game of confidence, right? How confident are you in the entrepreneur, in the founder, in the rest of the investors that you're investing in, right? How confident are you in to help them scale and de-risk their solution, right? And so anything you can do to add to that confidence, do. And I think this is just the points you mentioned is a great way to do that.
Yeah, it's all about reputation. All that really matters is reputation, right? The people invested in Sophie because she has a reputation and they've been able to follow her work. They kind of maybe feel like they know her, even if they don't, right? And I think that's there's a lot to be said for it, and it's so much easier because if you try to go, I've seen this happen a lot of times with people right now trying to get into climate. They have been interested in kind of environmentalism or helping fix the planet for a long time, but until they got laid off, they didn't make any action steps. Right now, it's like knocking on a door that's got 3 bolt locks on it. Right, nobody's home, nobody's gonna open, right? Because there's a lot of people now. But if you had built the network before, it'd be so much easier. Even if you don't have a massive network, if you just know people decently, you've met them, you've provided some type of value, you've demonstrated that you're legitimate, you're not just somebody reaching out seeking a quick win. People respect it, and it gets a lot more easy to get introductions to other people, and to really just kind of like make your way into the space. ClimateTech is not exactly a closed space. Like, it's pretty open and welcoming to people. I have noticed it seems like a lot of the new joiners, they just seem a bit impatient about it. Like, oh, like, I just want a job, just hire me, I can do it. It's like, no, we get it. You're eager, you want to help, but there's also a business here, and we need to make sure we get the right person, right? We need to get the right people at the right time. So I think just be patient for those people. But yeah, I definitely believe that it's all about reputation. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah. And, no pun intended, open door climate is a thing, right? I think that's one of the things that really got me actively talking to people in this space. And I can't tell you how many conversations I've had just as a result of that. So, maybe people aren't super willing to throw you a job the first time they meet you, but, sometimes you can have a conversation that can land you a stint on a podcast, right? So you never know what can happen.
Yeah. Um, that's funny. There's this one guy, he's not related to climate at all, but he had started a podcast in VC. I believe he's from the UK. I forget his name, but he started this when he was young, like he was like 13 or 14. And then eventually, I think like 7 years later, he launched his own fund. So like he's an example too of somebody who's done this in the traditional space. But all right, man. Well, I think this has been pretty great. Any kind of things you want to close up with?
I just wanna say how much I enjoyed this conversation, man. It's super great to react to news like this. It's incredibly inspiring, and I think most importantly, like for me, it gave me a real opportunity to go back and forth with you about what this means for the space, and I hope everyone else kind of enjoys digesting how big news. I think we might be big fans of this, maybe disproportionately, but I think it just means a lot for people who are looking to build a brand in the space, that it can really take you far. And I'm glad we got to talk about it.
Yeah, 100%. I think it may be only big news inside of our space, obviously, but it says something when you see that news posted and then everybody sharing it on their Twitters, on their LinkedIn, like reposting it and just like talking about the stories of it. Like, we literally jumped on this to record this, right? With like, that is something I never do. I was like, hey man, let's chat tonight. Like, let's do this.
Yeah.
Because it's good. It's like, it's really cool. It's really good news. And yeah, maybe Sophie will come on at some point. That'd be great.
That's the hope.